All right. Now, who was the guy who rang in yesterday? Craig, was it? Who started off saying that he'd been taking a close look at the situation in Syria. Call didn't last long when I asked him if the close look was largely just seeing what his social media threw up against him. And I did kind of explain, maybe I was a little bit mean to people, and I said it's amazing the number of people who, having revealed themselves as experts in American politics and Trump, suddenly overnight also revealed that they were on X, that they were experts in Middle Eastern history and politics. And I said, look, I do like going to the person we have gone to for some time here at the platform to talk about international affairs, and that is Robert Patman, who joins us again from his very scholarly-looking study. How are you, Robert? Good morning to you.
Morning, Sean. Fine, thank you.
Look, I kind of stepped back as I saw, well, I didn't see what was unfolding. I saw reports coming out of Syria. I'm not an expert on the region and the geopolitics of it, but I imagine you are, and you've known about the region. Can you, in a very broad sense, tell us what has happened in the last few days in Syria?
Yes, a turning point, Sean, in retrospect, was about a week ago when the second biggest city in Syria fell to a coalition of the rebels. What's been remarkable about Syria's had a civil war since 2011, and during that period, the Assad dictatorship, supported by Russia and Iran, has got the upper hand to a point where the rebels, such as they were largely confined to a northern pocket in Syria. What's happened in the last week has been a complete transformation. The rebels had been preparing for something like 6 months, training largely in that northern part of Syria they control. And what was interesting was that this coalition included groups which had previously been fighting each other as well as fighting the Assad regime. So the coalition that came together basically is a broad-based group. It's led by a group called the HTS, which is previously, in a past life, was linked to Al-Qaeda, but the leadership of that group now have disowned that connection and are talking very moderately. I think they realise their chance of power is best achieved by cooperating with other groups. So,
are they religious fundamentalists, Robert, or not?
No, I think we've got to be very careful here, Sean, because when you have a dictatorship such as Assad, it's very difficult for us in the Western world, in liberal democracies, to fully appreciate what it's like to live under a dictatorship. If you live under a dictatorship, any opposition, according to Assad, were terrorists. And the other thing is, there's no peaceful protests were tried against Assad. In 2011, he shot them like ducks, completely unarmed people, over 3 months, and that led to civil war. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I think we have to give the people taking over from Assad a chance. They say they're committed to democracy. I think it's incumbent on the international community to try to incentivize that development. Yeah. One way of doing that might be, for example, at the moment, Syria is still labouring under severe sanctions, which were quite rightly
against the Assad regime.
That appalling Assad regime. And it might be good to get discussions going between the new group that's taken power and try to identify a series of landmarks in the transition to democracy. I think most Syrians want democracy and freedom. And, the trick here is to try to encourage the new leadership to go there and give them incentives for doing so. One incentive is to say to them, if you can achieve a schedule for democratic elections within a period of time, and they've already satisfied one condition, which is the release of all political prisoners, including those which had, some of which ideologically don't share the same views with. So that's quite promising, but it's very delicate. Unfortunately, although Assad's gone, that hasn't stopped Israel from launching a couple of airstrikes on Damascus. And also, there is evidence that Netanyahu's government has extended its grip on the Golan Heights. Golan Heights is part of was part of Syria until 1967.
Yeah.
So there's some worrying things there.
Well, let's just put that in context, Robert. Until the Arabs tried to wipe out Israel, and they decided they'd keep the Golan Heights so the Arab world couldn't wipe them off the map again.
Yeah, but throwing Israel into the Red Sea has always been a fantasy.
Yeah.
Israel.
I want to ask about this new group. And has this revolution been genuine, or has it been a proxy war? Have the Americans or the CIA or someone else been in there funneling arms?
Oh, Turkey has been a key player.
Yeah.
In supporting them. As I say, lots of the questions you're asking will only be answered in the days and the weeks that follow. All I'm saying so far, the initial signs are quite promising, in that the group that have taken over haven't carried out any recriminations. They've begun discussions with people who actually work for Assad, including his prime minister, and said there will be no recriminations. So they seem to have learned, this group, from the situation in Libya.
Yeah, but I was going to raise that. We can be optimistic, Robert, but you look at Libya, there was so much optimism there, and it's a horribly failed state now. I don't think
the Western world has potentially a very constructive role here. And it's very difficult, and with the best will in the world, Sean, to go from a dictatorship to a democracy very rapidly.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, the liberal democracies we enjoyed matured over decades, even hundreds of years. So we've got to be realistic here. But there's something like 5 million Syrians living abroad as a result of the civil war. They had to leave their country, and over 1,300 in New Zealand. And I think many of them are quite highly educated and may be able to return and play a role. But look, it's great the Assad dictatorship has gone. He's been given so-called exile or asylum in Moscow. This is a major geopolitical defeat for the Putin regime. It's a major defeat for Iran. And in that sense, I think we are looking at a pretty positive situation, but a challenging one. And of course, the trick for all of us is to hope that Syria is not going to become, go from a dictatorship to to a situation where there's a resumption of civil war.
Right. Will the Russians be happy to go home and leave Syria to it, or could they, because, it was...
Well, they've already evacuated much of their military personnel. And the interesting thing is that the new group in charge have actually said to the Russians, well, they didn't attempt to destroy their planes or anything. They just said, please take them away at your convenience. But that's another interesting development. You could understand an opposition or resistance group, which is armed, fully smashing up all the facilities they find that belong to the Russians. But they haven't done that so far. And that's interesting because I think they're sending a message to Moscow. We don't like your support for the dictatorship, which crushed us for years, which led to appalling... 1 million Syrians died under Assad. Wow. So, but it is a constructive step. And I think they are thinking about the day after, the group that have taken over.